What is up? Feeling good right now. Just had me some cold brew, B Coffee Roasters cold brew. Picked it up at Center Point Brewing, so I figured I'd get myself a 6-pack. And here's their Blood Orange IPA from Center Point Brewing. Just to kind of calm my nerves from the cold brew, bring me down a little bit. Here we go. One sip. Everybody knows the rules. The initial flavor and the initial taste is really good. It has kind of this weird sort of bite at the end. So I'm not sure, like the first taste would probably be about an 8.2. But the kind of bitterness aftertaste is like probably like a 5.5 or a 6. So we'll kind of merge those. I'll give it a 7.3. Close enough. I don't know about you, but I love these mugs. This is a Sun King mug, but everybody makes these kind of glass mugs now that is, I don't know, there's just something about it that I find very cool. And I want to kind of start collecting these, and I want to get, I think Nitro Cold Brew looks really cool in a mug like this. So I'm going to start, I want to eventually get our own keg of Nitro Cold Brew here at the house. Once the expenses aim in the right direction there, that will for sure be being done. But anyways, what I wanted to discuss here today is the easy problem of consciousness. So if you pay attention at all to what I write, I've lately been writing kind of on the topic of consciousness and free will, and I can't help but think people probably think I've gone cuckoo on this topic because just the term consciousness has this kind of weird mystic kind of ring to it, and I want to kind of discuss how there's really no mysticism involved with it at all. It's kind of a very straightforward concept. But understanding it scientifically can be very hard, and that's kind of where I kind of want to go with this today. So first of all, consciousness, when I talk about it or when I use that term, all I'm referring to is the awareness or the experience of creatures. So humans, I know I possess consciousness. I'm aware of what it is like to be me. And I would assume most other humans have this experience as well. And we for sure act like other people do. If we didn't actually think other people possessed consciousness or were conscious, I think the world would be a very different place. So we act as if everybody else is. And we don't know how far down this goes. I would claim that dogs are probably conscious, cats are probably conscious. But the farther down you go, the harder it is to kind of suppose this. So it's hard to think an ant has consciousness, and it's definitely hard to think that a rock possesses consciousness, even though there is theories out there, one being panpsychism, which just supposes that all matter in the universe possesses consciousness on some level. Now, the consciousness of an atom is probably not nearly as bright, I would say, as the consciousness we possess as humans. We see things in vivid color and detail. We can think abstractly, and we kind of experience all this through the lens of consciousness. If an atom were to have consciousness, it's probably not nearly what it's like to be a human. It might just be dark, but have some sort of feeling and experience going on there. So that's when I use the word consciousness, that's all I'm referring to is experience what it is like to be something. So it is like something to be Justin Frazier, therefore I am conscious. So David Chalmers is, I believe, the philosopher or scientist that has distinguished the easy problem and the hard problem of consciousness. Now, many of you might think that consciousness is not mysterious at all, and I think as humans, we've kind of just begun to think that, and it's very easy to think that, of course we're aware, of course we have experience, of course we're conscious. That's just something that comes along for that's just life. Like, why wouldn't humans be conscious? It just makes sense, just because ever since we were born, we were conscious and we never thought anything of it. But I'm going to make a video later explaining the hard problem of consciousness, but this actually is mysterious, because there's the physics of the universe don't really have, we have the physics of the universe, and that we can't really make sense of why that would lead to consciousness at all. Why do we have consciousness? Why does it feel the way it feels? Why does it feel like anything? Why are we aware? Because you could, due to like the physics of the world, could make human beings and have, like, we would have no consciousness at all and nothing would change. That's why panpsychism, in a way, is kind of hard to refute, because if it were true, nothing about the world would actually be different, because consciousness doesn't actually involve sort of like a will of sorts. Just because you're conscious doesn't mean, like, consciousness doesn't do anything. It's just simply experience and awareness. So the easy problem of consciousness, again, David Chalmers I believe he's the guy that coined these terms. So the easy problem is just kind of the neural correlates of consciousness, which means, basically what that means is, I could have a specific experience, say what it is like to taste this beer here. And we could hook my brain up to an fMRI, scan my brain, and when I take a sip of this beer, you can show the state of the brain and what the brain is doing as I take that sip, and what having that taste of beer on my tongue, where in the brain is activating and what is kind of correlated with the experience of giving beer. That's the easy problem. So I know drinking beer and tasting beer is correlated to a specific state of the brain, and we can study this through brain imaging techniques. So that's the easy problem. But that doesn't tell us why the experience is there in the first place. And you can do this with so many different behaviors, so many different experiences, where you can correlate that experience with a state of the brain on an fMRI physiologically, but that correlation doesn't tell you what gives rise to the experience at all, which is why consciousness is mysterious, because we don't know what gives rise to being conscious, to having this experience. That's the hard problem, which I'll talk about in another video. Other aspects of the easy problem is we can explain the ability to apply information to thinking and behavior. So we have a very well understood grasp of the neuroscience behind thinking and behind behavior, even though that's expanding, and it's very, I just read the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky. It's basically this thick and goes into all the nuances of behavior. So that research is obviously growing and it's very complex, but we have a pretty well understood grasp of kind of abstract thinking as far as the brain is concerned, and kind of the information processing involved in the brain, and how kind of the neuroscience of the brain applies to behavior. Again, that doesn't tell us why consciousness arises in the first place. And another aspect of the easy problem is we can explain the ability to focus attention. I can focus on this camera right now. I can focus on this lovely beer, and I can recall items from memory, and I can kind of integrate perceptions of my experience, which gives kind of, which is why the human mind is so complex and involves such kind of high-level abstract thinking, which is so different from other creatures. We can think in ways that is way more abstract and way more complex than any other creature on the universe, which is why I think a lot of people think consciousness is strictly involved in humans and nothing else, which I don't think that makes sense at all. I don't think you have to be able to think in an abstract manner to be conscious. And so this is the easy problem of consciousness, which is basically we well understand the neuroscience of the brain. We well understand just kind of the brain physiology and how different states of brain physiology and what we understand from the level of neuroscience is correlated to specific experiences. But again, that doesn't tell us why consciousness is there in the first place. So basically, to kind of relay this maybe more clearly, is you can have the exact same picture we have of the brain right now. We can have the fully developed neuroscience we have of the brain right now. And consciousness could not be there. So we could understand the brain scientifically very well, but consciousness could not be there for every human ever made. It simply could not be like something to be a human. Everything could be blank. Consciousness is not there. We basically are human living robots, and we can understand the brain, but consciousness could still not be there. So that's where the hard problem comes in, which I'll explain later. But just going back, the easy problem is simply basically the correlates of the state of the brain, the correlates of the brain to specific experiences. But again, those experiences and the correlation to that state of the brain doesn't tell us why consciousness is there in the first place. And this is again why I think this topic and subject is very cool, and why I also think because of this, it's going to be very, very hard to we might not ever understand how consciousness arises. My intuition is that it's involved with kind of, you get enough information processing and then boom, that's where consciousness arises. So the brains of humans, basically the brain is just a bunch of information processing, sort of like a computer, obviously way more complex, and you get kind of consciousness kind of emerges out of that. And I think it does kind of go down to the level of animals. I'm not sure how far it goes, but again, I think this is something that's very hard to study, and this isn't just like kind of cuckoo talk. Like, there are serious academics and scientists that actually their career is fully devoted to understanding consciousness in more detail and really vigorously studying it in a scientific manner. So this isn't just kind of this isn't just a hippie subject. It's many scientists take it seriously, and I think it's very cool. A very good podcast to listen to. Basically anything Sam Harris talks about on consciousness is, I think, really great. But he also has a specific podcast with Anil Seth, who is a guy who's a neuroscientist that studies consciousness. Phenomenal podcast. Really hard to. It's really dry, but it's very dense in detail, which is why I had to go back and listen a few times to really understand. But that's a very good podcast to listen to kind of get kind of the more hardcore science on the subject. But I will leave you with that. Hope anybody finds this interesting. If not, don't really give a shit either. I'm doing this for me, not for you. Sorry. I'm going to enjoy my beer and relax for the rest of the night. Enjoy.